It didn't happen, Claire told herself. It's a bad dream. Just another bad dream. You wake up, and it'll be gone like fog. She had her eyes squeezed tight shut. Her mouth felt dry, shriveled up, and she was pressed against Shane's hot, solid side, curled up on the couch in the glass house, terrified. It's just a bad dream. But when she opened her eyes, her friend Michael was still dead on the floor in front of her. Shut those girls up, Shane, or I will, Shane's father snapped. He was pacing the wooden floor, back and forth, hands clasped behind him. He wasn't looking at Michael's body, shrouded under a thick, dusty velvet curtain. But it was all Claire could see. Now that she'd opened her eyes again, it was as big as the world, and it wasn't a dream. And it wasn't going away. Shane's dad was here, and he was terrifying. And Michael was dead. Only Michael had already been dead, hadn't he? Ghostly. Dead during the day, alive at night. Claire realized she was crying only when Shane's dad turned on her, staring with red-rimmed eyes. She hadn't felt that scared when she'd stared into vampire eyes. Well, maybe once or twice, because Morganville was a scary place. Generally, and the vampires were pretty terrifying. Shane's father, Mr. Collins, was a tall, long-legged man, and his hair was wild and curly and going grey, long enough to reach the collar of his leather jacket. He had dark eyes, crazy eyes, a scruffy beard, and a huge scar running across his face, puckered and liver-coloured. Yeah, definitely scary. Not a vampire, just a man, and that made him scary in a whole different way. She sniffled and wiped her eyes, and quit crying. Something in her said, "Cry later, survive now." She figured that voice had spoken inside of Shane too, because Shane wasn't looking at the velvet-covered sprawl of his best friend's body. He was watching his father. His eyes were red, but there were no tears. Now Shane was scaring her too. "Eve!" Shane said softly, and then louder, "Eve! Put a sock in it!" Their fourth roommate, Eve, was collapsed in an awkward heap against the far wall by the bookcases, as far from Michael's body as she could get. Knees up, head down. She was crying hard and hopelessly. She looked up when Shane yelled her name, and her face was streaked with black from running mascara. Half her goth white makeup gone. She had on her death's hand Mary Jane shoes, Claire noticed. She didn't know why that seemed important. Eve looked completely lost, and Claire slipped off the couch and went to sit by her side. They put their arms around each other. Eve smelt of tears and sweat and some kind of sweet vanilla perfume, and she couldn't seem to stop shaking. Shock. That was what they always said on TV anyway. Her skin felt cold. "Shh," Claire whispered to her. "Michael's okay. It's all going to be okay." She didn't know why she said that. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. They'd all seen what happened. But something told her it was the right thing to say. And sure enough, Eve's sobbing slowed, then stopped. She covered her face with shaking hands. Shane hadn't said anything else. He was still watching his dad, with the kind of intense stare most guys reserved for people they'd like to pound in a hamburger. If his dad noticed, he clearly didn't care. He continued to pace up and down. The guys he'd brought with him, walking slabs of muscle in black motorcycle leather, shaved heads and tattoos and everything, were standing in the corners, arms folded. The one who'd killed Michael looked bored as he flipped the knife in his fingers. "Get up," Shane's dad said. He'd stopped pacing and was standing right in front of his son. Don't you dare give me any crap, Shane. I told you to stand up." "You didn't have to do that," Shane said, and slowly stood, feet slightly apart, ready to take or give a punch. Claire thought, Michael wasn't any threat to you. "He's one of them. Undead." "I said he wasn't a threat, and I say that you just don't want to admit your friend's turned freak of nature on you." Shane's dad reached out and awkwardly punched Shane on the shoulder. It was supposed to be a gesture of affection, Claire supposed. Shane just rode with the blow. "Anyway, done is done. You know why you're here. Or do you need a reminder?" When Shane didn't answer, his father reached into his leather jacket and took out a handful of photographs. He threw them at Shane. They bounced off Shane's chest, and he reflexively tried to catch them, but some drifted free and fell to the wood floor. Some slid over toward Claire and Eve. "Oh God," Eve whispered. They were pictures of Shane's family, Claire guessed. Shane as a cute little boy, arm around an even thinner little girl with a cloud of curly black hair. A pretty woman standing behind them, and a man she could barely recognize as Shane's dad. No scar back then. Hair cut short, he looked normal, smiling and happy. There were other pictures too. Eve was staring at one of them, and Claire couldn't make any sense of it. Something black and twisted and... Shane bent over and snatched it up, fumbling it back into the pile. His house burnt. He got out. His sister wasn't so lucky. Oh God, that twisted thing was Alyssa. That was Shane's sister. Claire's eyes filled up with tears, and she covered her mouth with both hands to hold in a scream. Not because what was in the picture was gross. It was. But Shane's own father had made him look at it. That was cruel. Really cruel. And she knew it wasn't the first time. Your mother and sister are both dead because of this place. Because of the vampires. You didn't forget that, did you, Shane? I didn't forget! Shane shouted. He kept trying to make the picture fit into a neat stack, but he didn't look at them at all. I dream about them every night, Dad. Every night. Good. It was you got this started. You'd better remember that too. Can't back out now. I'm not backing out. Then what's all this crap? Things have changed, Dad. Shane's dad mimicked him, and Claire wanted to punch him, never mind that he was about 4 times her size and probably a whole lot meaner. You hook up with your old friends and next thing I know, you lose your nerve. That thing was Michael, right? The glass kid? Yes. Shane's throat worked hard, and Claire saw tears glittering in his eyes. Yeah, it was Michael. And these two? Nobody. That one looks like another vamp. Shane's father fixed his red-rimmed glare on Eve, and took a step towards where Claire and Eve were huddled on the floor. You leave her alone. Shane dropped the pictures into a pile on the couch and jumped into his father's path, fist clenched. His dad's eyebrows raised, and he gave Shane a scar-twisted grin. She's not a damn vampire. That's Eve's Rosser, Dad. Remember Eve? Huh? His father said, and stared at Eve for a few seconds before shrugging. Turn into a wannabe, then. Just about as bad in my book. What about the kid? He was talking about Claire. I'm not a kid, Mr. Collins, Claire said, and clambered to her feet. She felt awkward. All strings and wires, nothing working right. Her heart was hammering so hard it hurt to breathe. I live here. My name is Claire Danvers. I'm a student at the university. Are you? It didn't make it a question. You look a little young. Advanced placement, sir. I'm 16. Sweet 16. Mr. Collins smiled again, or tried to. The scar pulled the right side of his mouth down. Never been kissed, I'll bet. She felt her face go red. Couldn't stop it, or keep herself from looking at Shane. Shane's jaw was set tight, muscles fluttering. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. Oh ho, so it's like that. Well, watch yourself around that jailbait, my boy. Still, Shane's dad looked weirdly pleased. My name's Frank Collins. Guess you figured out that I'm this one's father, eh? You just live in Morganville. Though I've been gone a few years now. Since the fire, Claire said, and swallowed hard, since Alyssa died. And Shane's mom? Because Shane never said a word about her. Molly died later, Mr. Collins said, after we left, murdered by the vamps. He spoke for the first time, a soft, tentative voice. How did you remember? About Morganville after you left town? I thought nobody did once they left. Molly remembered, Mr. Collins replied. A little bit at a time. She couldn't forget Lissa. And that opened the door, inch by inch, until it was all there. So we knew what we had to do. We had to bring it down. Bring it all down. Right, boy? Shane nodded. It didn't look like agreement so much as a wish not to get smacked for disagreeing. So we spent time preparing. And then sent Shane here back to Morganville to map the town for us. Identify targets. Did all the stuff we wouldn't have time to do once we rolled in. Couldn't wait any longer once he yelled for help, though. Came running. Shane looked sick. He wouldn't look at Eve, or Claire, or Michael's body, or his father. He just stared. There were tear tracks on his cheeks, but Claire couldn't remember seeing him crying, really. What are you going to do? Claire asked faintly. First thing, I guess we bury that, Mr. Collins said, and nodded towards Michael's shrouded body. Shane, best you stay out of our way. No. No, don't you touch him. I want to do it. Mr. Collins gave him a long frowning look. You know what we're going to have to do? He glanced at Eve and Claire, to make sure he doesn't come back. That's folklore, Dad, you don't have to. That's the way we're going to do things. The right way. I don't want your friend coming back at me next time the sun goes down. What's he talking about? Claire whispered to Eve. Sometime in the last few minutes, Eve had gotten up to stand next to her, and their hands were clasped. Claire's fingers felt cold, but Eve's were like ice. He's going to put a stake in his heart, Eve said numbly. Right? And garlic in his mouth? And... You don't need all the details, Mr. Collins interrupted. Let's get this done then. And once we're finished, Shane's going to draw us a map of where to find the high-rolling vampires of Morganville. Don't you know? Claire asked. You lived here. Doesn't work like that, little girl. Vamps don't trust us. They move around. They have all kinds of protection to keep themselves safe from retribution. But my boys found a way, right, Shane? Right. Shane said. His voice sounded absolutely flat. Let's get this done. But, Shane, you can't. Eve, shut up. You don't get it. There's nothing we can do for Michael now. And if he's dead, it won't matter what we do to him, right? You can't, Eve yelled. He isn't dead. Well, Mr. Collins said, I guess that'll be his problem when we plant a stake in him and chop his head off. Eve screamed into her clenched fists and collapsed to her knees. Claire tried to hold her up, but she was more solid than she looked. Shane instantly whirled and crouched next to her, hovering protectively and glaring at his father and the two motorcycle dudes standing guard over Michael's body. You're a bastard, he said flatly. I told you Michael was no threat to you before, and he's no threat now. You killed him already. Let it go. For answer, Shane's father nodded to his two friends, accomplices, who then reached down, seized hold of Michael's body and dragged him out around the corner to the kitchen door. Shane bolted back to his feet. His father stepped into his path and backhanded him across the face, hard enough to stagger him. Shane put out his palms. Defense, not offense. Claire's heart sank. Don't, Shane panted. Don't, Dad, please don't. His father lowered the fists he'd raised for a second blow, looked down at his son, and turned away. Shane stood there, shaking, eyes cast down, until his father's footsteps moved away, towards the kitchen. Then Shane spun around, lunged forward, and grabbed Claire and Eve by the arms. Come on, he hissed, and moved them both stumbling towards the stairs. Move! But Claire protested. She looked over her shoulder. Shane's father had gone to look out the window, presumably at whatever they were doing in the backyard. Oh God, to Michael's body. Shane, upstairs, he said. He didn't leave them much choice. Shane was a big guy, and this time he was using his muscle. By the time Claire got herself together, they were upstairs, in the hallway, and Shane was shoving open the door to Eve's room. Inside, girls. Lock the door, I mean it. Don't open it for anybody but me. But Shane, he turned to Claire, took hold of both of her shoulders in those big hands, and leant forward to plant a warm kiss on her forehead. You don't know these guys, he said. You're not safe. Just stay there until I get back. Eve, looking dazed, murmured, You have to stop them. You can't let them hurt Michael. Shane locked eyes with Claire, and saw the grim sadness. Yeah. He said, Well, that's pretty much done. Just, I have to look out for you now. It's what Michael wants. Before Claire could summon up anything else in protest, he pushed her back over the threshold and slammed the door. He banged on it once with his fist. Lock it! She reached up and flipped the deadbolt, then turned the old-fashioned key as well. She stayed where she was, because she could feel, somehow, that Shane hadn't moved away. Shane? Claire pressed herself against the door, listening. She thought she could hear his uneven breathing. Shane, don't let him hurt you again. Don't. She heard a breathless sound that was more like a sob than a laugh. Yeah, right. And then she heard his footsteps moving away, down the hall to the stairs. Eve was sitting on her bed, staring into space. The room smelt like a fireplace, thanks to the fire that had rage next door, in Claire's room. But there was only some smoke damage, nothing really serious. And besides, with all the black goth stuff everywhere, you couldn't even really tell. Claire sat down on the bed beside Eve. You okay? No, Eve said. I want to go look out the window. But I shouldn't, right? I shouldn't see what they're doing. No. Claire agreed and swallowed hard. Probably not a good idea. She rubbed Eve's back and gently thought about what to do. And that wasn't much. It wasn't like allies were exactly falling off the trees around here. Besides Shane, they had nobody else. Their second best choice was a vampire. How scary was that? Still, she could tell Amelie, but that was a little like arming a nuclear weapon to take care of an ant problem. Amelie was so badass. The other badass vampires backed down without a fight. She'd said, "I will make it known that you are not to be troubled. However, you must not further disturb the peace. If you do, and it is your fault, I will be forced to reconsider my decision." And that would be unfortunate. Claire finished aloud in a whisper. Yeah, pretty unfortunate. And there was no way that this didn't constitute disturbing the peace. Or wouldn't. As soon as Shane's dad got rolling, he'd come to kill vampires, and he wasn't going to be stopped by any little considerations like, oh, his son's life and safety. No, not a good idea to call Amelie. Who else? Oliver? Oliver wasn't exactly at the top of Claire's best friends forever list, although in the beginning she thought he was pretty cool for an old guy, but he'd been playing her, and he was the second most badass vamp in town, who'd use them to his and this situation against Amelie if he could. So no, not Oliver either. The police were bought and paid off for by the vampires. Her teachers at school? No, none of them had impressed her as being willing to stand up to pressure. Mum and Dad? She shuddered to think what would happen if she put in a frantic yell to them. For one thing, they'd already had their memories altered by Morganville's strange psychic field, or so she assumed, since they'd forgotten all about ordering her home for living off campus. With boys, Mum and Dad weren't exactly the kind of backup she needed, not up against Shane's dad and his bikers. Her cousin Rex, now, there was an idea. No, Rex had been sent to jail 3 months ago. She remembered Mum saying so. Face facts, Danvers. There's nobody. Nobody coming raiding to the rescue. Riding to the rescue. It was her, Eve. And Shane against the world. So the odds are about 1,000,000,000 to 1. Hello everyone, thank you for listening to the audio file or audio reading I've done of a Rachel Kane book. I'm putting this in there, so if you want to skip past this bit and move on to the next video, that's fine by me. This is just like a cancer plug, because I want to do this, as well as also I have to do this, because the thing you've just listened to is illegal for me to do without having a charity case behind it, which I don't want it to be like a situation like, oh, I'm only doing this for the sake of cancer, which I'm actually doing this for the sake of cancer, but I did cancel this series a long time ago. It came to my recent attention that I should redo this in a better format, and I feel like now is a perfect opportunity to actually restart this in the worst possible way. Back in 1st of November, back in 2020, Rachel Kane sadly passed away to a rare bone cancer called sarcoma. Now, in the description below is going to be a link that you can. It's going to be a link so you can support the research into helping people survive and defeat sarcoma bone cancer and soft tissue cancer cells and all that stuff. So that's just going to be in the description right there down below. It is in pounds for those American ones, but obviously PayPal and all the research still goes to the same thing, because once it's been cured, once they found a cure for it or found an easier solution for it and stuff like that, it does get sent around all around the world, because everyone works on the same thing all over the world. It's just that this charity is based in UK. I live in the UK, so it still goes to the same goal to beat sarcoma for a long time, and I feel like this is the best opportunity to work with it for any Rachel King books that we do during the Morganville series or any future series that we do. Obviously, this is even going to be in the future series if we do them. So any book that we do by Rachel Kane is going to have this at the end, just to plug a little bit of a cancer support for people with sarcoma, because it is a rare cancer, and there is not a very good survival rate. So just putting that in there to help people or to support the issues that are out there, because I'm not going to get any money from these videos at all, even in like the present one. I'm not getting any money of this recording, or in the future, if possibly I do. But this is not what I'm about. This is all about for what Rachel Kane succumbed to in the end. So hopefully that as a team together we can beat sarcoma and end one of the cancers that are killing people, because no one likes that. But anyway, have a good day.